Hello, hello, and welcome to that Second Gen Life with Samhar. I'm your host, Samhar Raya. If you are a second generationer, child of immigrants, a diaspora leader, professional change maker, however you identify, this space is for you. This podcast is more than just storytelling. It's about strategy, identity, leadership, community, finding yourself in this beautiful diasporic journey we're all going through. We'll talk about everything from navigating the workforce as a diaspora professional to the role that you can play in making an impact from where you are, locally or around the world. We'll talk about the realities and joys of being a second generationer, some of the challenges, some of the delights, but most importantly, we're going to remind you that you are powerful and that your job here is create the spaces you wish existed. Hey everyone, welcome to that Second Gen Life with Samhar. I'm your host, Samhar Araya, and I'm so happy to be back with you again. Today we are rounding out our three-part series looking at the three ways diasporas make massive impact. We've already discussed social impact and economic impact, and we're saving the best for last, civic impact. Now, if you hear diasporas and civic impact, you probably think of a few things. You think of immediately politics and elections, or diasporas being involved in politics back home. That is part of our civic impact, but it's not all. I am going to show you a much more expansive view of what we mean when we say civic impact. And I want you to think for yourself, if you're a member of a diaspora community, how you're engaging in this space on your day-to-day life, or maybe anything you've done that falls into this space. And most importantly, I want you to listen and think about what you can do today, here and now, in your life, in the world that we're in. This is April 2025, and we are really experiencing a lot of tumultuous changes in our policies, in our systems, in our livelihoods. I think people with diaspora backgrounds, immigrant backgrounds, any sort of underrepresented space, women, transgender people, communities, disabled, the low income, the immigrant. I just find it across the board, all different walks of life are being affected right now. So I want you to listen to this episode and put your hat on around what civic impact looks like for you and what it can look like. Generally speaking, civic impact at the end of the day is how diasporas are using their time, talent, and treasure to shape policy outcomes in their lives here or back home, specifically around civic expression, civic engagement, and representation. And that tends to play out in the politics space. I know you immediately think of organizing for elections, and I've done it. I've organized diasporas for different elections over the years, but it's also just about having a sense of your relationship with the state with a capital S, and the government that you pay taxes to or that you engage with, and the countries you reside. And that relationship between you and the state is really what civic life and where civic impact rests. And so I want to start with a really important framework that helps you look at the role and relationship you have with government and that you have with state. And this is not an example for the West or an example for a certain region or country. This is just a basic model. In order for a state to be legally established as a state under international law, there's a few deliverables, there's a few outcomes you have to look for. One of those is the relationship between the citizen and the state. And you could even broaden that to say the relationship between the people and the state. And there's in many ways an agreement that the state will provide citizens or people living in their country with basic services and basic protections. So basic services will be like your best hope is running water, your best hope is housing, or your best hope is safety in terms of protection. Basic services mean trash pickup. It could mean jobs or assistance from the state if you're sick or if you're poor. There are services that a state agrees to provide people living in their country. And then there's protection. And the protection is, yes, protection of your own physical body, protection of your basic rights to be able to speak, to be able to think, to be able to move without fear. And there's variations of that interpretation. So I'm going to speak generally first, because I don't know, for those of you listening, which part of the world you're from or what kind of governments and countries you're living in and what frameworks you're living under. But I want you to just understand there's a relationship between you and the state, capital S again. All right. Now, governments come and go, and they have different policies and different frameworks. But generally speaking, a state has to be able to provide services and protection. Now, protection, again, we think of our physical protection and we think of our sort of intellectual human protection, like expressions or ideas. And that's really where a lot of issues come up around what should be protected and what should not. But the basic assumption that a state will provide you services and give you protection is at a minimum. That is what a state is agreeing to. Similarly, what the people agree to do is overall, I think I need to get the stats on this, but every country more or less collects taxes from its people. So residents, people residing in this country are paying taxes to the state so that it can function. And those taxes are supposed to strengthen and improve the services and protections being afforded to you and allow the state to build more programs or function more efficiently. So your taxes are supposed to go to making systems better. That's why those of you who may live in DC, you have these license plates that it says taxation without representation. That's part of it, right? The taxes are meant for citizens and residents to basically invest in or give back to the state. The other thing that people promise to do is engage in some sort of conversation with the state. And I'm speaking like in casual terms. I want you to think of this as a relationship, that it's a conversation between the people and the state. And the conversations look different from country to country. In the Western models, it ends up looking elections and voting. It looks like people speaking out. In some countries, it may mean protest. In other countries, it may be speaking with your feet and leaving. There are indications that sometimes it's easier for people to leave their countries and as a form of them communicating what they like or need or don't need. And that is contested, but for sure, people are not ready to hear what I'm saying on that front. But I do want you to understand that people express their needs with their voice or their feet. And that voice is on the ballot, it's on the street, and with their feet, it's when they leave. And so I want you to think of migration as also an indicator of choices that people may feel forced to make or feel they have no other option to make. All right, so this relationship between citizen and state is like a cycle, okay? And I have a diagram. If this was a video, I do show this in my trainings and my courses. We talk about this, and it is considered an agreement, a compact, if you will. And you decide how you want to apply that or where it fits politically. I'm not in any way suggesting that this only works as a democracy, this system that I'm describing. I'm suggesting that whatever kind of political model your ancestral homeland operates in or the country you reside in operates in, there is a relationship between the people and the state. And there will be varying degrees of services provided by the state, various degrees of protection provided by the state, and various degrees of entry points for people to pay taxes and speak out about what they like and don't like or what they need and what they want, okay? So with that, civic impact ends up looking like how diasporas engage in that space. And so let's think of concretely, I'll give you some examples of really great ways that diasporas drive civic impact. First and foremost, we've already discussed that diasporas, we have a sort of four-pronged approach to how we engage in society. And this is true for all people, but diasporas are particularly good at it. This is the ROPE framework. And think of the ROPE framework, it's an acronym, all right? And that is we represent ourselves, our interests, our people, our needs. We organize, we participate, and we engage. So when you form an organization, you form a nonprofit. Generally speaking, you are representing, organizing, participating, and engaging. So participating is with your organization, whatever your organization provides. But the engagement, that last part is super, super important. There are so many nonprofit orgs that fail to fulfill the last part of what a nonprofit organization is here for. It's to engage. And the reason that nonprofit organizations generally are formed is to fill a gap that exists in society and fill a gap and address needs that are being underserved or provide a service that is not yet being provided enough or at all by the state. So this isn't in any way suggesting the state should do everything or like that a socialist structure, but it's suggesting that when a nonprofit forms, it is to address a gap. It's the same thing with a business. A business is responding to a need in the market. They're responding to either demand or they see an opportunity, right? So nonprofits and for-profits operate two sides of the same coin. But for diasporas who build nonprofits to address civic issues, it tends to be around two functions. It's either service delivery and providing services to communities or people that are underserved by the state or who are in greater need, or it is providing advocacy, rights-based work for particular communities. So when diasporas form nonprofits and they fulfill this rope framework, in civic impact, that engagement is super important because that is a communication with the rest of the world. That is showing up to either do advocacy, showing up to do engagements with decision makers. That is engaging with the community beyond the group that you're serving. And the rope framework is very important for diasporas who want to engage in civic issues. You've got to really be ready to embrace and engage with the public. And that means not just being potentially under the microscope of anybody who wants to learn about your org, but you are now positioning yourself in a place to influence and to advocate for the needs of the people you're serving. For civic impact, nonprofit organizations are so important. They are providing trainings, capacity building, rights-based work, protections, legal services, grassroots organizing, and it does tend to focus on protection of basic rights. It does tend to focus on serving underserved communities, and it tends to focus on shifting policy outcomes so that certain rights can be protected. Or if you're not a nice person and you want to take rights away from people, because that's what we're seeing organizations also form to advocate for people to have less rights, which is horrible. I don't think I see diasporas doing that, but I want you to be fully aware of when you engage in civic impact, that is what's also happening. People are advocating for the removal of rights from certain groups, and that's really scary. So if you're a diaspora individual and you're listening to civic impact, you have to really go in headstrong, eyes wide open, and fully aware that you're going to need to engage. Of course, there's other elements of civic impact, but I find the nonprofit groups, the nonprofit formation, the most important. The second way that diasporas drive civic impact is by grassroots organizing. This is what we see: mass protests, popular mobilization, bringing diasporas together to demonstrate, to sign petitions, mass organizing across the country. And that works, that has impact. But after years of doing this, I understand now that the demonstrations don't work without the either nonprofit organization strategy or the advocacy strategy. And advocacy is long-term. And that's my third pillar of the civic impact, is undertaking advocacy, diaspora advocacy, as a real strategy for policy, for changing policy outcomes. That's a space that I sit in quite a bit. I am asked quite often by diasporas of all walks of life to help them navigate the American political system, and political really because it's political halls, but it is public policy. There's a difference between the politics you see on the news and whatever you hear on the podcast versus what it means to shape policy. And that requires you understand how laws get passed and what power looks like in the halls of Congress, what times of the year are very important for advocacy, what times of the legislative cycle and calendar. Also, the role of the United States around the world on the issues you care about, where they have standing. And this is all changing so drastically, so quickly for us here in the United States that I feel grief when I talk about advocacy right now, because we're finding less and less opportunities to find partners on the other side. And even with the advocacy strategies that I'm working on now, we're being very strategic and focused on who we engage with, how we build relationships, and really having these conversations so we can change systems better for all. Advocacy is really the heart of civic impact, in my opinion. You are doing everything from trainings, know your rights trainings, helping people who are unable to leave their homes get out the vote. You're helping them get to the polls. You're helping people translate documents, things that they would not normally have otherwise known, but had you not translated it. There's so many examples. And for the Diaspora Academy, we do spend most of our time on building capacity for diasporas to engage in advocacy. But we're also working now on some Know Your Rights work and pooling together resources that are available in multiple languages for diaspora communities. So I want you to check it out. But when it comes to diaspora civic impact, I think we also understand what we do for civic impact is first and foremost related to our lives here, or it should be, right? There's the argument that civic impact for diasporas is only for things that happen in the homeland, and I would say that's not true. Diasporas are increasingly organizing around the needs that they have in their lives here on the domestic front, and coupling that with foreign policy issues, which tend to be on the issues affecting their homeland. So when I sit with the most cynical people about diasporas and I say civic impact, they go, you're the ones that want to change elections back home. You're the ones that are disrupting life back home. I would say that is a very negative take of diasporas, but it's also a very small, myopic view. That it's true. It is true that there are many diasporas that engage in civic impact to shape policy outcomes, specific civic and political and electoral outcomes in their homeland. And especially where countries are having large outsized diasporas, it's true. It feels like that's all that diasporas do. But I'm telling you, there are many more issues diasporas take on the civic impact that affect their lives here. So I want you to think of your civic impact priorities, and I want you to think of what it means to organize. In 2025, my mind and the mind of many of us here in the United States especially is thinking about what civic impact means for our own lives here, because we need to. But we also know that for decades, for centuries, diasporas have been involved in shaping civic outcomes in their homelands. And I can have that conversation a little more deeply another time, but where the season that we're in and what's top of mind to, I'm sure, all of you listening now and those of you that I regularly speak to, we're all looking at what civic impact we can make from where we are for our lives. So if you're interested in talking more or you want to explore that with me, let me know, because we are here for you. We do have trainings. We do have resources. I am working on a Know Your Rights resource, so that'll be up soon. But I want you to really think holistically about your civic impact goals, your aspirations, even just your understanding of it. All right. So with that, this concludes the third part of our series, Diaspora. So with that, we are concluding our 3-part series on diaspora impact. We've covered social, economic, and civic. And I hope this really gives you a bird's eye view of all the different ways that diasporas regularly make impact. Now, we can go deeper into each one. Trust me, these are just meant to give you a little taste of what we offer and what we focus on. But if you don't know where to start, or if you're trying to think of the ways that you want to drive impact, assess your interests, assess what matters to you, and take a listen to these 3 episodes and tell me what you think, all right? Drop me a comment, send me a note. Any questions are always welcome, all right? I hope you're well. Take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow That Second Gen Life with Samhar on your favorite listening platform.